Hi everyone, this is BritSimon. I don't normally do videos like this. I don't normally answer questions one-on-one. But there was a particular question that I've been asked by a lady called Tanya, I presume. Tanya has asked a series of questions that shows me that she doesn't quite understand how the timing of the 2NL will work, when she'll go for interview, and those sort of things. And she's trying to make plans for her life, and has some complication, right? So the timing of the interview and the 2NL will be fairly critical to her and fairly important, and could actually be quite complex for her. So I thought it would be useful to record a video and sort of answer this for Tanya, because it's going to be important. There'll be parts of this that will be important to other people to understand, particularly in if you're new to DV lottery and you're a DV lottery, perhaps DV 2024, right? So let me show you firstly the question we're talking about. Oh dear, excuse me about the cough. So here's the question. The question was submitted at my blog, by the way, at BritSimonSays.com. I prefer questions to be asked there. I will always answer questions on BritSimonSays.com. So if you can put questions onto my YouTube, and the last time I did a YouTube live the other day, somebody put a comment that that getting me to answer oh dear, getting me to answer their question was almost like winning the lottery. That I wasn't answering every question. I'm sorry about that. I can't get to every question during a live session. But if you have a question and you put it to BritSimonSays.com, you'll get an answer, usually within the same day, sometimes within a few minutes, depending on whether I'm online or not, and maybe a day later or something, but you'll get an answer. Okay, so in this case, Tanya asked me a few days ago, October 18th, when was that? Earlier today, apparently. So she was questioning, firstly, her number. So there's a few things I want to establish in order to understand her situation, right? So firstly, she's asked about, she's correctly given me her embassy. That's very helpful. It's helpful for me to answer the question accurately if I know which embassy she's at. She's at Zagreb, Croatia. That's good. She's given me her number, EU 13,000 in DV 2024. And then she asked the typical, is it a high number or a low number? And then talks about the B1, B2 visa. So she then goes on to ask a couple of other follow-up questions. So I'm going to take you through how I would think about this if I were her, and and lead you through the answers to each of her questions. And she's got a couple of follow-up questions here. So I'm going to put it all in this one video, and hopefully it's interesting to others as well, and it will help you think about your own situation. Okay, so now, firstly, she's told me her embassy, as I say. She's told me her case number. So the first question, is it high or low for EU? Well, 13,000 is at the lower range of what we know to be the range for EU, which I think is up to about 60,000, right? So it's in the first 25% of numbers. So I would call that a low number. If it was, if the highest case number we know about is 60,000 and she's case number 59,000, then that's obviously a high number. If it's 30,000, it's somewhere in the middle, right? It's this isn't a precise answer when you say a high number or a low number, and people are really trying to get to, are they going to have a chance or not? Well, I don't know whether any particular case number will have a chance or not, but I'm reasonably confident that at 13,000 EU, she's not going to have a problem with the case number, right? So we know that the visa bulletin for December is now, for EU, is at 6,000. It went from 5,000 to 6,000 in the latest visa bulletin, okay? So we need to consider what the visa bulletin is doing compared to her number. we also need to consider how fast her DS-260 is being processed, and we need to consider her embassy, whether it's a poor performing embassy or not. Now, on that last point, Croatia, I'm not worried about the embassy. That the embassy is doing fine, so that's not even a factor. It's not an embassy that is known for building up a big backlog of cases, such as, to give an EU example, Turkey, to give an Africa example, Nairobi. So it's not one of those poorer performing embassies, right? So Zagreb, Croatia, not a problem. No need to worry about that. Case number EU 13,000, it's a low number range, right? And there's almost no scenario I can see where that case number wouldn't become current. And it's really a matter of when will it become current, okay? She then asks about a B1, B2 visa situation, and she's concerned about immigrant intent. Now, immigrant intent, just as a quick aside, is when you submit the DS-260, that is an application for an immigrant visa. And so it's clear at that point that you have intention to emigrate to America if you can, right? And immigrant intent, which is what that's termed as, can be a factor that will be taken into account when you apply for a non-immigrant visa. So if she was applying for another visa, a B1, B2, or an F1, or a J1, or anything like that, then one of the factors that they're trying to ascertain is whether or not you're going to go home at the end of your visa term, and whether you're going to comply with the rules, right? And if you've shown intention to immigrate, immigrant intent, by filing a DS-260 or by other things, that's one factor that can work against you for that non-immigrant visa application. It doesn't mean that you can't get the non-immigrant visa. It just means it's a little bit harder to get the non-immigrant visa because you've shown a desire to move to America, right? So it's just a factor that's taken into account. And I think Tanya has got a little bit overthinking about it, a little bit concerned about it. In her particular case, she already has the B1, B2, so that's not a problem. And it's only really when you're making an application for a new visa that it's a problem that would be considered. It's not a problem typically, normally. I mean, occasionally it is. In a very, very small percentage of the cases, it might be a problem when you're actually entering the USA, because the officer at the border has the right to ask you some questions and may ask you, for example, what are you doing here in the USA? When are you planning to go home? Are you looking to work in the USA? Have you ever applied for the lottery? Oh, I see you've won the lottery. Or, maybe you mentioned that you've won the lottery, right? That could be a factor that the Border Patrol officer takes into account. And so, well, it's not Border Patrol, but anyway, the officer takes into account at the airport, right? So it's not very likely. I don't think anybody should worry about it, honestly. But just be honest if you're ever asked those sort of questions, and tell people, what's going on. Same thing when you're going for a non-immigrant visa. You've got to be honest. They know that you've applied, that you've filled in the DS-260. And last point on that point, applying for the lottery, entering the lottery, like in DV 2025, that is not showing immigrant intent. Like buying a lottery ticket doesn't mean you have to pay taxes straight away on the winnings that you hope to win, right? Entering the lottery, the DV lottery, does not necessarily mean immigrant intent. But later, when you file your DS-260 after you were selected, yeah, that's immigrant intent. That's showing very clearly that you have intention to emigrate, right? Okay, so then I think I confused Tanya a little bit with my, I was expecting her to read between the lines, and I confused her a little bit with this March point. She was talking about having to travel to the USA in March, right? And I'll come back to that in a minute. So she questioned what I meant by March may end up being an activation trip, and I just talked about the immigrant intent, right? So, so let's talk about the March may end up being an activation trip. So what was in my mind when I wrote that answer to Tanya was that her case number is likely to become current probably before March, almost certainly, right? So if we think about how the case numbers are going, the visa bulletin up to now for the first 3 months has been pretty slow. So EU is at 6,000. I would expect some movement for January interviews, which would be published in the next visa bulletin, and maybe it goes up by 2, 3, 4,000. Maybe it goes up by 10,000. I don't know, right? But I would expect that to be, moving up. And and the next visa bulletin is for January interviews, right? The bulletin after that, so the next visa bulletin is going to be published in November, and that would be for January interviews. And then the visa bulletin that is published in December will be for February interviews, right? And so is it likely that EU goes from 6,000 where it is now to some number that exceeds 13,000? What is she? 13,000 something? Yeah, 13,000 something. Is it likely to exceed that number within 2 visa bulletins? That's a possibility, a very real possibility. Or it might take 3. Now, if it takes 3, that means that she could get an interview in March, right? So my guesses are that depending on whether she's been her DS-260 has been processed or not, she might become current in the very next visa bulletin. That's less likely. I think the February timeline is quite likely. That's probably my best guess, that she would become current in that visa bulletin for February interviews. And at the latest, I would have thought she would have become current and therefore ready to be interviewed for the March interviews, which is a January visa bulletin, right? The visa bulletin that's published in January. Funnily enough, that visa bulletin will be called the February visa bulletin, but let's not get into that. Okay, so the timing of that, I was thinking when I answered her first question that her trip in March, that she's planning to the USA in March, which is all I knew about at that time, might be when she's activating her green card. That's called an activation trip, right? So she probably already has flights booked. She's planning to go at some point in March. And I was assuming that she's probably going to be interviewed in maybe January, more likely in February, and possibly in March, right? And if it's in March, that's going to be a bit difficult for her. And I'll come to that in a few moments, right? But that's my rough guess, which means that if she's interviewed in February, let's say, which is my more than likely guess, she'll get her passport back. And when she gets her passport with the visa stamped in it for the DV lottery, which is an immigrant visa, they will have cancelled her B1, B2 visa because the next time she enters the USA, she has no choice but to enter the USA using the immigrant visa at that very next entry. She can't go in the next time saying, I want to enter this time on my B1, B2, but I want to come back in 6 months' time or 3 months' time or whatever to enter on my DV lottery immigrant visa. She can't do that. That's not an option. So when she gets the visa printed in her passport, if she has an interview in February, they would cancel without prejudice. It's not a bad thing, but they will cancel the B1, B2 visa. Okay. So that's part of the normal process, and she needs to consider that. Tanya, you need to think about what that means to you. All right, then. So I've addressed that section, right? And then she says, I may get a positive answer in January and may need to activate my visa in March if I pass the DS-260. I think she's sort of understanding what I was trying to say, and she's sort of repeating back to me a little bit, which I don't love, but she's just trying to confirm. And then she's saying I can travel because I already have the B1, B2 non-immigrant visa in the passport, so I do not need to apply for one. So in other words, she's understood from my earlier answer that immigrant intent is not a problem. Okay, So that's good. Now then she gets on to a little bit more. This is fairly, this is fairly common. People develop their questions over a series of questions. So now she's giving me more detail. She's starting a winter job starting in December and ending sometime in March. Now, that sometime in March probably means that her travel plans to the USA, I hope, are flexible, because it sounds like she's doing a seasonal job, ski instructor or whatever it might be, from December to March. She's expecting to finish sometime in March, so the end of the ski season, maybe March 15th or whatever it might be. And then she would book a trip straight away to America using her B1, B2 visa. That's what she has planned up to now. That's my assumption. So she keeps saying this thing if she gets a positive answer from KCC. I don't know what she means by positive answer. But the point is that her DS-260 may be processed, and she may be being scheduled for an interview. So I'll talk about when that happens in a moment, how all that process happens. And then she's asking, do I have time to schedule my interview sometime in advance? I try to find it in the FAQ, so have time to go to get the medical, and the seasonal job is not in the residential country. So she's got some complication here, right? So she's asking, how will it all work? What will happen? So let's bring up a calendar. Let me see. Let's bring up a calendar here. Where's my calendar? I have a calendar page on Excel. That's right. Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to bring across this calendar. Let's just talk about when these things happen. And I want to talk you through a typical sort of process. And we're going to assume that for whatever reason, just for the purposes of this illustration, that she doesn't get an interview in February, that it's actually going to be, the visa bulletin is going to go very slow. I'm just making this up. This is not what I believe, but I'm making this up. And that her number is going to become current in January, the visa bulletin that's published in January, which would be for a March interview, right? Now, the timing is this. The 2NL is normally sent out, that's wrong. The visa bulletin is normally published between the 8th to the 15th. So in January of next year, I would expect the visa bulletin to be published either in this week from the 8th to the 12th, or perhaps the 15th, 16th, 17th, that sort of time scale. The 8th to the 15th is an approximation. It sometimes will come out on the 7th. Sometimes it'll be the 17th. Every single month, I have people that ask me, when's the visa bulletin? And I always say from the 8th to the 15th. And then every single month, people are freaking out on the afternoon of the 15th because the visa bulletin didn't get published or something. And they're like, oh my God, what's happened? Did Trump cancel it? I'm like, no, just calm down. It can be a bit later than this. It can be a bit earlier than this. And that's all okay. The visa bulletin is published every month. And it's usually between the 8th and the 15th, but it's not 100% of the time between the 8th and the 15th. And the days we're talking about are in America, right? Not where you live, in America, right? So don't you start freaking out because it's late in the day on the 15th in Afghanistan or something, and it's not even midday yet in America. So there's still time for that to be published, and maybe you've got to go to bed and have sweet dreams one more night, and then it'll be published the next day. Or maybe it won't be. Maybe it'll be a couple of days later. Either way, relax. Okay. So the VB is published between that time. And let's say that Tanya's number becomes current in this VB in January, just because I've got the calendar up here and it helps me illustrate. She would get a notice in her email that says, go and check your ESC page. And in the ESC page, the "you have been selected" letter will have been replaced by another letter where it says the time and date of your interview, right? and that is going to be. So I've jumped a point here. I've jumped a point. So the 2NLs come out in the latter part of the month. I need to put this in as well. 2NLs sent until end of month, right? So the VB is published between the 8th and the 15th. As soon as the VB is published, 2NLs can be sent out between that point and roughly the end of the month. And again, sometimes, occasionally, it goes into the first couple of days of the following month, but roughly speaking, it's that time period. So let's say that, just for example, the VB is going to be published on the 12th, on the Friday the 12th in January, right? The 2NLs will come out in those 2 weeks leading up to the 31st, so 3 weeks there, and possibly even the first couple of days of February, right? And they will be, those 2NLs will be sent out in several different batches. Sometimes it used to be like one big batch of 2NL sent all at the same time. Then it went to 2 big batches. And more recently, over the last year, we've been seeing these sent almost daily. So that one embassy will get their interviews, their 2NL sent out one day, and another embassy, or maybe 2 or 3 embassies, will get their 2NLs the next day. And the day after that, there'll be more 2NLs for different embassies and so on. So there'll be, each embassy will get one sort of batch of 2NL. So once Accra embassy is done, then, we could be moving on to, some other embassy, right? And it's roughly alphabetic. So the A embassies are first, and it moves through the alphabet. Okay, so in other words, the VB has been published on the 12th. Between the 15th and, let's say, Friday the 2nd of February 2024, 2NLs will be sent out. And we would expect Tanya to get her 2NL if her DS-260 has been processed and if her embassy has capacity, right? I believe her embassy will have capacity. And I think she's probably processed her DS-260. I think she's a single young lady. She's from Croatia. She's probably never been a nuclear rocket scientist. She's probably going to be processed pretty quickly. So if she submitted her DS-260 fairly quickly in May or June even, perhaps even July, she would have her DS-260 processed by that time, right? Okay, so then she's going to get an interview for some time in March. It could be any time in March, right? It doesn't necessarily, it's not based on her case number or anything like that. It could be any particular day in March, okay? So that means that she got 2NL, let's say sometime around about the 22nd, just as a guess. And she has all of February, in which time, or all of the time between the 2NL and sometime in March. And that's the time she's got to prepare. And during that time, she has to go for a medical. That medical has got to take place in the country where she's going to interview. Typically, and with some exceptions here for certain homeless embassies and that sort of thing, for her, she will have to go from wherever she's doing her seasonal job. She'll have to go for a medical, probably sometime, let's say in February, in this example, so that she's ready for her interview in March, right? So the timing is going to start to get a little bit sticky for her, because she's going to have to go to Croatia for the medical, and then she's going to have to be in Croatia for the interview itself, right? Now, she's got a seasonal job, so she's going to say to me without a doubt, oh, well, I got a seasonal job. Can I change things? Yeah, you can. You can contact once you've been assigned to the embassy, not before, but once you've got your 2NL. And let's say they've given her, let's not say the 13th, let's say they gave her the 15th of March. She can contact them and ask for an alternative date. But the date they give her could be in April, it could be in May, it could be in June. There's no guarantees that it'll be, some convenient date, right? So it's not like a hair appointment. It's not like a date with a boyfriend or a girlfriend or something. This is a immigrant visa application, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. To be honest, I would say, whatever it takes, get to your visa interview. I would also say, whatever it takes, leave your seasonal job and get to the medical, right? But really, she's going to have to make that decision for herself. So, and she might be able to combine one trip to Croatia to do the medical and the interview, but she's got to space out the medical. The medical has to be a few days as a minimum before the interview, so that there's time to prepare the report, right? So, and the physicians will tell you how much time that minimum time is supposed to be. It varies by country. So the physician might say, when is your interview? Oh, well, if your interview is on the 15th, then the latest we could do your medical is the 8th, because we need 1 week to prepare the report and give it to you for you to take it to the interview. That's a possibility. Or they might say, we've got no appointments. We've got no availability of appointments. You're going to have to come in February for your appointment. Or we know your interview is on the 15th, but we can't see you until the 22nd. And in that case, you go for your interview and you follow up with your medical when the report is ready at a later time. And that just means that you're going to be on administrative processing while they wait for your medical report. Okay. So for Tanya in particular, with her seasonal job, there's going to be some complication that she needs to think through. But for all the rest of you, you need to think about these timelines. The visa bulletins are published every month like this, between the 8th and the 15th. Then 2NLs are sent out almost immediately. They start coming out within a day or two after the visa bulletin has been published. They come out for the rest of that month. And the time period we're talking about is for essentially 2 months later. So I often say there's 6 to 8 weeks notice between the 2NL and the interview date. It's about that time, but it can be a little bit more or a little bit less than that time, right? Now, you could apply this to any month. I know someone is going to ask me, oh yes, but how does it work if the visa bulletin's in February? It works the same way. It's just that the visa bulletin in February is going to be concerning April interviews, and the visa bulletin that's published in March is concerning May interviews, and so on. It's the same thing every month. So, so if Tanya gets current, if her number becomes current in the visa bulletin that is published in December, then she could have a February interview. But again, Tanya in particular has this seasonal job problem, and she's going to have to think how she works that out. And also, she may have to change change her flights to the USA if she's already booked them. So she's got a little bit of thinking to do about how she wants that to work. And it really depends, first of all, on when does your number become current, and is your DS-260 processed by that time, right? If your number becomes current, but your DS-260 is not processed in time, then you'll be scheduled at a later date, a following month, could be the next month, could be 2, could be 3 months later, whenever your DS-260 is processed, right? You need both of those things to be true. You need to be current, and you need to have your DS-260 processed. And thirdly, actually, you need your embassy to have the capacity to give you an interview, right? Without backlogs and lots of people waiting for an interview in front of you. Okay, so long-winded answer to one person's question, which I hope has given other people a bit of an idea about how the whole process works for other cases, right? That's my hope in here, that that I'm answering more than just Tanya's question. Otherwise, it's one video for one person. I can't really, afford the time to do that. But hopefully this was helpful for Tanya and would be helpful for others too. All right, everybody, that's all I wanted to go through. Can't believe I've spent 30 minutes on this video, but relatively simple topic, but one that is a concern for a lot of people. They want to know how the timing will work. They want to know what rights they have to change an appointment time and that sort of thing. They want to know those things. But in general, I would say if you're lucky enough to get an interview, do everything you can to make that interview date, right? This is I don't think there's ever been a more important thing you've got going on. A seasonal job, Tanya, is not more important than emigrating to the USA. So, you generally put other things to one side in order to make sure you make your date. Because the thing is, you never know. You never know what's going to happen, right? In 2020, right? We were all sitting here in January and February thinking everything's lovely, and people were getting their interviews lined up for March. And then in March, the whole world went to crap, right? And everything changed, right? So there will have been someone, no doubt, who thought they could have delayed their interview. They delayed their February interview until late March, and that person probably lost their visa because of that delay. So you generally don't want to introduce delays yourself. You want to do things as quickly as possible because there could be a pandemic, there could be a local political problem, there could be a war breakout. We don't know, right? We don't know what's going to happen. So take the earliest opportunity that you're offered, rather than saying, "Yeah, I'm busy that day, so I want to take another day," right? Only move your interview appointment if it's absolutely necessary. Okay, think I covered it. Thanks for listening along. Please do give me a thumbs up on this video if you liked it. Make sure you're subscribed, and also make sure you're getting notifications. Click the bell on the channel there so you get the notifications. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Good night.